Some people don't know how to receive love. Not because they don't want it, because they never learned how. And the most unsettling part is this. Many people live their whole life like that, without even realizing it. Because growing up without love doesn't always feel like a wound. Sometimes it feels normal, like nothing is missing, like this is just how life is. And that's why it's so hard to see. You don't remember it as an absence. You remember it as what was there. What existed, what you had to accept. And that changes everything. Because if you don't know something was missing, you also don't know what you're looking for now. But if love has ever made you uncomfortable, if you doubt someone when they treat you well, if it's hard for you to trust even when there is no reason not to, if a part of you is always waiting for everything to end badly, then this may make more sense than you want it to. Because growing up without love doesn't leave you empty. It programs you. It programs you to survive instead of connect. Psychology explains this very clearly. When a child doesn't receive consistent affection, they don't just feel pain. They learn something much deeper. They learn that love is not safe. That love is unpredictable. That it can disappear without warning. That it doesn't depend on them. And when you grow up with that idea, your mind doesn't question it. It turns it into truth and starts building everything from there. That's why you become hypervigilant. You start analyzing things other people don't even notice. A message that takes longer than usual. A shorter reply. A slightly different tone. A silence that wasn't there before. And suddenly, your mind starts finishing the story. Something changed. It's not the same anymore. They're pulling away. They don't care as much. And you feel it in your body. That tension, that knot in your stomach, that alert feeling that appears before you can control it, even if nothing has actually happened. But for you, something is happening. Because you are not reacting to the present. You are reacting to what you learned. Your mind is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to protect you. But it is using an old map. A map that no longer fits your current reality. And this is where it gets really confusing. Because even when someone truly loves you, you still may not know what to do with it. They say something kind, and it doesn't fully land. They tell you they love you, and part of you doubts it. Not because you don't trust that person, but because you don't trust what you feel. You analyze it, you question it, you minimize it. Or you do something even more subtle. You take the value away from it. You make it smaller, as if that would make it hurt less if it disappears. Because deep down, there's an idea you have carried for years. This is not for me. And you may not hear it clearly. Sometimes it disguises itself as logic, as caution, as realism. But it is still the same thing. A way to not expose yourself. Because feeling it for real would mean taking a risk. And for you, that never felt safe. Then a painful contradiction appears. You want love, but when love arrives, you don't know how to hold it. You are not rejecting love. You are rejecting what you feel when you receive it. And that creates a pattern. You get close, then you pull away. You trust, then you doubt. You open up, then you close again. And many times, you don't even know why. You just feel like something doesn't fit. So you step back. The other person doesn't understand, but neither do you. And this is where everything starts changing in a quieter way. Because if you can't accept love, you start trying to earn it. You try harder than you need to. You give more than you receive. You adapt even when you don't want to. You start thinking more about not losing the other person than about not losing yourself. You correct yourself constantly. You measure what you say. You measure what you do. You try not to fail. You try not to bother anyone. You try to be easy to love, as if there is some version of you that will finally be enough, and you live chasing that version. If I do this better, if I become more like this, if I don't make mistakes, then yes, then someone will stay. But that moment never comes, because the problem was never what you do. You are not trying to be better. You are trying to be enough. And that is what you learn to feel about yourself. No external effort can change that from the inside. And the more you try, the further you get from truly feeling loved. Because you start living focused on how people see you, and you stop noticing how you feel. That's where something inside you starts to wear down. Even if, from the outside, everything looks fine. You start feeling tired without knowing exactly why. You feel like you are always giving, but never really receiving the same. And that creates a feeling that is hard to explain. Like something doesn't fit, even if you don't know what it is. And then you start normalizing it. You tell yourself this is just how relationships are, that there is always something missing. That love feels like this. Like something that never feels fully complete. And you get used to that feeling. That small emptiness that appears even when everything seems fine. You stop questioning it, because you don't have another reference. You never did. You don't know what something different feels like. Something truly stable. Something you don't have to analyze all the time. And because of that, you may accept less than you need. Not because you want to, but because you don't know you could expect more. And when that doesn't work either, your mind does something even more silent. It protects itself. You shut down. Not all at once, little by little. You start feeling less intensity, less emotion, less connection. Things stop affecting you as much, but they don't fill you either. You become more stable, but also more distant. And that may look like calm, but it isn't. It is disconnection. Because when feeling was dangerous, not feeling starts to look like the best option. And then something even deeper appears. You start disappearing from yourself. It becomes hard to ask for help, hard to express what you need, hard to even identify what you need, because you learned not to need, not to bother anyone, not to take up space, not to be too much. So you do what you have always done. You make yourself smaller. You adapt. You stay quiet, even when you are not okay inside. And here comes the uncomfortable part. Maybe right now, you understand all of this. Maybe it fits. Maybe it makes sense. But that does not mean it will change you tomorrow. You may still react the same way, think the same way, feel the same way. Because understanding it is not the same as leaving it behind. But something has changed. Now you see it. And once you start seeing something like this, there are things you can't keep ignoring. Small gestures, small dynamics, small decisions. They begin to feel different. And that is uncomfortable. Because now you know not everything you felt was normal. And that opens a door. But it does not force you to walk through it. Because in the end, staying the same is also an option. And many people do. Not because they want to, but because it is the only thing they know. Changing means facing something you were never taught. You were not taught to love badly. You were taught to survive without love. But now, at least, you know something you didn't know before. You were not born this way. This is not just your personality. It is not something fixed. It is something you learned. And that changes more than you think.